Hi everyone, I'm Leanne and today I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in April. I had a massive reading month in April. I read 17 books. I've mentioned this a few times before, but I feel like when I come out of the Irish Readathon, it gives me such a fantastic appetite for reading. Like I have such a fantastic reading momentum. I think that increased focus that I give myself on my reading in March just really catapults me into April. 6 of the books I read were for work, so I'm going to talk about those at the end. But I definitely want to be doing quite a lot more work reading in the next few months. I've got like a little bit of catch up that I need to do with some of the things I want to read for my job. Quite a few of those were quite quick, short reads. And even in my non-work reading, I had a few shorter reads as well. And I think that kind of not only increased the number of books that I was reading because they were shorter, but it also gave me like a really good momentum. Anyway, as we have 17 books to talk about, I'm going to get straight into it. I'm going to start with the 2 non-fiction books I read. And again, I was really pleased to be reading a little bit more non-fiction in April as well. The first one I read was Nostalgia, A History of a Dangerous Emotion by Agnes Arnold Forster. This book was really interesting, but it wasn't what I expected going into it. And I think that's poor on my part. I don't think I fully understood what the book was. I was expecting it to be quite a fun, maybe academic light exploration of the feeling of nostalgia. And I guess because I was approaching that term of nostalgia through my own experiences, I don't know why, but I was kind of expecting it to be largely about maybe 80s, 90s, maybe early noughties nostalgia. But this is actually a far more historical and detailed account. And I think it really expands the social and cultural understanding that we now have around this term of nostalgia. By taking a historical investigative look at this term, you actually find out largely how it was actually considered a disease for a long time. It was this really kind of negative thing that you were afflicted with, this sort of pining for the past. And as we progress through the years and our cultural understanding of this phenomenon, the author showcases how this feeling of nostalgia can actually be really dangerous in kind of social and political rhetoric. This idea of wanting to go back to the good old days when everything was better is actually often really linked to a lot of kind of prejudice, with a dissatisfaction for progress and kind of liberalism, and how it's really associated with a lot of anxiety around change. So this wasn't the book that I was expecting to read. I actually think it was much better and more interesting than what I was expecting to read. And then I also read Gross Anatomy, My Curious Relationship with the Female Body by Mara Altman. This was also fascinating. So through the lens of the author's relationship with her own body, she presents a lot of really interesting considerations about how the female body is thought about in society, but particularly in relation to things that are deemed like gross or unappealing. There are aspects of it which I think have been covered quite a lot in kind of discourse around women's bodies, things like body hair and period blood, but I think they warrant, continuous discussion to reduce the stigma associated with those very normal things of anatomy. But the author also discusses things that like I've never read about before. I've never really heard people talking about things like lice infestations and kind of like anal problems, like bodily smells and like discharge and camel toe, lots of different things that are typically kind of associated with a lot of shame. She really openly discusses, and through the course of her personal experiences in the book, she kind of breaks down the stigma and the shame that she had around her own body. And I think by opening up that dialogue with you as a reader, it also challenges the kind of shame that you might have around your own body, things that our bodies might experience that we are too kind of nervous to talk about, but actually must affect a lot of people. So I think this was a really valuable book to read in that regard. There's definitely a couple of things included in this book where I was like, oh my God, I wish someone had spoken openly about this with me a few years ago. It would have saved me a lot of anxiety about my own body. I've read a lot of books that are about kind of female anatomy or about kind of women's bodies. And I think this one is actually quite unique in the perspective that it takes on that topic. I read 2 adult romances in April. The first of those was Big Date Energy by Bethany Rutter. In this book, our main character is Fran, who has been a serial monogamist. She has gone from relationship to relationship. They've been long long term, and she now finds herself post her latest breakup committing to being single. She wants to experience the world of dating a lot more, and she is approaching it with big date energy. She is not looking for a relationship, she just wants to have fun. And I really enjoyed that perspective in this book. I really enjoyed that there was someone that wasn't necessarily pursuing a relationship really actively, was just kind of enjoying dating for what it was. That was something that I definitely felt like I related to from when I was single, but I also really appreciated seeing Fran begin to reevaluate whether some of her behavior was actually as empowering as she thought it was. Meanwhile, Fran's mother has signed her up for this like dating show, which like the closest dating show I can compare it to is First Dates. So it's this idea of being matched with someone and then you go and have a meal in a restaurant together. Fran's pretty reluctant to do this, but because her mother's really pushing for her to do it, she decides she'll go along and it'll be part of kind of the variety of experiences that she has in her singledom. But when she arrives there and sees who she has been matched with, things take a real turn, because it's actually her ex-girlfriend, her first girlfriend that she had when she was a teenager, and they had quite a dramatic and impactful breakup that has really stayed with Fran. So that's something that she's really not expecting. I'm a big fan of a lot of reality dating TV shows, so seeing a little behind the curtain of those shows was something that I found really, really fun. And overall, I really enjoyed this one. The main way I would describe it really is fun. I read it super quickly, loved the bisexual representation through Fran's character as well. And I actually really love how Fran kind of embraced the bisexual stereotype of being greedy. She was like, yes, I am a greedy bisexual. And I love how she kind of embraced that and spun it on its head and like reclaimed the idea of being a greedy bisexual. So yeah, overall I had a lot of fun with this one. And I also had loads of fun with The Prospects by K.T. Hoffman. This is a sports romance with two male characters. One of them is trans, and the sport of choice in this sports romance is baseball. And I really enjoyed that because it's a sport that I don't really know loads about. I think initially when I started reading a bit more sports romance, I was drawn to sports that I maybe knew a lot about. So for instance, like I was really drawn to football, but actually I think knowing the sport really, really well actually takes you out of the story a little bit if you notice maybe like inconsistencies with the depiction of the sport, whereas I don't know anything about baseball really, so this was really, really good. It's not really enemies to lovers, I'd say it is more like rivals to lovers, with really great chemistry between both of the male main leads. And I also really enjoyed learning more about all of the complications around being a trans athlete. And I also think we hear so much about trans women in sport. I think it was really valuable to hear about the experience of a trans man in sport as well. It's something that we don't really talk about as much. I always do really enjoy the sports aspects of my sports romances. And yeah, this was another one where I just had loads of fun reading it. I really believed the chemistry between the pair. It felt really like authentic and that it progressed in a really kind of genuine way. So yeah, lots of fun with this one. I also read The Honey Witch by Signe J. Shields, and I didn't know that this was also a queer book, so that was a lovely surprise for me reading it. I'm dabbling more and more in like cozy fantasy, and this one wasn't like a new favorite, but I'm definitely glad that I read it. I did really enjoy it. This is about Marigold, who finds out that her family come from like this legacy of witches, but until this point in her adult life that has been kept secret from her by her mother, who wanted to protect her from the dangers of this family lineage. Whereas her grandmother was really passionate about bringing Marigold into this aspect of the family. It causes a rift between the mother and the daughter because the mother has kept this secret from Marigold, and Marigold really gravitates towards her grandmother and her grandmother teaching her more about their powers. I really loved how the magic system was really based in like the natural world, and specifically in this one it's based around honey. And I think there's just so much magic around the natural world, and particularly things like bees and honey and that kind of thing, that it's such a rich and beautiful source from which to draw a magic system. Now, one of the reasons that Marigold's mother wanted to protect her from this lineage was because if you embrace becoming a honey witch, it comes with a curse that you can never fall in love with anyone. They cannot fall in love with you. And this is a very serious curse. Marigold isn't initially expecting that this is going to be an issue for her. She has not really had any interest in her experiences of like courtship that she's had with men. But then Lottie Burke, who is a skeptic when it comes to magic, she's very grumpy, enters Marigold's life. That becomes more complicated. I don't actually remember when this book is meant to be set, but there was elements of the kind of descriptions that made me feel like it was quite Regency. Meanwhile, the island that Marigold goes to in order to become a honey witch is called Innisfree, and I think the juxtaposition of that just felt a little bit weird to me. Part of me feels like the narrative was drawing on aspects of Irish culture without really understanding it or fully embracing it or even kind of like respecting it. So that was just a slight niggle that I had with the book. But overall, I had a really nice time with it. As I said, I loved the magic system. Not my favorite fantasy that I've read, but I definitely did enjoy it. I also read She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark. So this is a short story collection that is really like out of my comfort zone. This short story collection is largely about kind of an insatiable hunger in lots of different forms. It's largely about women who aren't satisfied in one way or another, and these kind of really deep, desperate desires that they don't know if they can be satiated. As always with a short story collection, there are some stories that I enjoyed more than others, but I'm even reluctant to use the word enjoyed because most of these stories made me very uncomfortable. There are content warnings in the back of the book, and I don't think any of the like topics were in any way kind of like triggering for me. They were unlike anything that I'd read about before, and to varying degrees they all kind of draw on maybe aspects of like light body horror, kind of supernatural or like sci-fi or fantasy elements. There was one story in particular called The King, which I'm not sure I've ever felt like so uncomfortable, like physically uncomfortable while reading something, but I couldn't possibly look away. And I think for the author to be able to elicit such a visceral reaction from me as a reader really highlights the quality of this writing. Like, whilst I felt uncomfortable the whole time, the writing was superb. I'm so glad that I read something that pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I'm just really impressed with this collection. But again, I don't know if enjoy is the right word to use for how I felt about it. I also read a classic, so I read The Call of the Wild by Jack London. I'm really interested in reading more animal stories, and it was really interesting to return to one that is a classic in that animal adventure genre. This is the story of a pet dog who's captured and is forced into becoming like a working dog in the freezing cold landscape of Yukon, and we follow this dog being like a pawn or a bargaining chip and being used for trade, and their life just not really being like respected. And it was really fascinating to see that comparison of a dog being used for like a utility and a resource compared to my understanding and my relationship with dogs as, you know, a family friend. I thought the depiction of the really icy landscape was done fantastically. Like, I really felt that atmosphere, that terrain, and I thought it was really powerful how the author depicted humans at their most kind of callous and cruel, and just how they treated an animal. It's really a survival story as well, and I think because I want to read more like animal adventures, this was a really great one to read to kind of contextualize that sort of as like a genre as I explore more work in that subject matter. Okay, moving into some books for younger readers, although this one I guess is kind of transitioning us into that. This is Heroes and Villains, Poems About Legends by Anna Sampson and illustrated by Chris Riddell. So there are a bunch of different poets included in this collection that Anna Sampson has collected together, all around different kind of subject matters of like heroes and villains, drawing on lots of different kinds of mythology, and I really, really enjoyed that. With it being an anthology of lots of different poets, I didn't really get on with actually quite a few of the poems in this, but it was really interesting to see the poems in the context of like similar subject matters and how different kind of myths and legends were understood and depicted in different ways and what they meant culturally. I have to say though, I have read quite a few books like this where it's a collection of poems around a certain theme and Chris Riddell has done illustrations to them. And it's just such a wonderful reading experience. It kind of feels like you're like poring over Chris Riddell's sketchbook. Like, it's such a gorgeous reading experience because the way he brings these poems to life is just so wonderful. It brings a lot of richness to the writing, and I cannot recommend these types of anthologies enough for a really cozy reading night. I read 3 YA books, not including the ones that I read for work. We'll talk about those at the end. The first of those was On the Comeup by Angie Thomas. So Angie Thomas is probably best known for The Hate You Give. We're following 16-year-old Brie, who has ambitions and dreams of becoming a rapper. And not just any rapper, she wants to be like the greatest of all time. But she's struggling a lot with kind of her familial relationships, her friendships, and also her position in her school life. She's really struggling with a lot of those things. And she's really struggling with this label that has been attached to her for being like trouble. Because of her family complications and her mother's difficult life and how close they are to homelessness, Brie also carries a lot of weight on her shoulders for wanting to become this really successful rapper so she can, you know, protect her family and give them kind of safety. I found it really interesting to see the world largely through Brie's eyes and how she's really close to this life of kind of crime and danger and violence, and she's rapping about them, but also in a way where you can see she's not fully in there. Like, she's rapping about things that she doesn't necessarily fully understand, but they're still so incredibly impactful in her own life. It was really heartbreaking to see the level of prejudice that she faces, you know, when she's just a teenage girl who is trying her best to make something of her life. And I loved how the author didn't shy away from Brie being a really kind of complex and nuanced character. I do think in terms of like the quality of young adult writing, Angie Thomas is just like a master of it in how she makes her characters and her themes really complex, in the sense that she's dealing with quite like heavy and important topics, but the writing is not complex. The writing is really accessible. And I feel she has a really authentic way of writing about teenagers that are often underrepresented and misrepresented. I just think everything she writes is brilliant. I also read The Last Bookstore on Earth by Lily Braun Arnold. So this is a post-apocalyptic female romance largely based in a bookshop. So we are following our main character Liz a year after there has been this kind of natural disaster event, which they refer to as the storm. It has really kind of devastated society. It has created this kind of like post-apocalyptic world where resources are really depleted. It's kind of bringing out the worst in humanity as they try and protect themselves from one another. And Liz has managed to find refuge in the bookshop that she used to work in, and that has become kind of her safe space. But then Maeve comes across the bookshop and becomes involved in her life, and things spiral on from there. I think this is one where I liked the premise more than I liked the execution of the book. I think it had quite a sort of simplistic writing style, which isn't in of itself a bad thing, but I think the type of topic, in terms of it being this like natural disaster, post-apocalyptic situation, I don't think the writing was weighty enough to carry the substance of that topic. And I think comparing it to how Angie Thomas can carry a really weighty topic with writing that is suitable for a young adult audience, I think I just felt a real kind of distinction and difference between how both of those books are executed. I liked that this one had a female romance in it. I thought the passages where you learn more about actually what the storm was, they were written really brilliantly, I think. But one aspect of how this story was told that I found incredibly jarring was the amount of kind of like cultural references throughout it. So lots of references to lots of other books, but like not in any kind of like deeper meaningful way, just kind of referencing their titles. But not only books, like that kind of makes sense because they're in a bookstore, but like lots of references to like celebrities, movies, TV shows, music, like lots of pop culture references. And I can kind of understand that in a way that grounds it in being quite like a contemporary reimagining of like what the world would be like if a storm like that, like a natural disaster like that, happened in modern day America. But the references were just too frequent. Like I found like it really pulled me out of the story, and I'm not really sure what the amount of them added. Like if there was a few peppered here and there, it would maybe make more sense, but it is so incredibly frequent that it was just really jarring. So unfortunately, I think I wanted to like this one a lot more than I did. I also read Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. So this is a novella in the world of Heartstopper. I really loved the Heartstopper graphic novels, and I've really enjoyed the TV show as well. And this novella is set just before Nick is heading off to university. So we're following a lot of the conflict between Nick and Charlie as they think about what it means for their romantic relationship with Nick not being around in the same place as Charlie anymore. I think it's really common for teenagers at this stage in their relationships to have a lot of anxieties around whether the relationship is going to survive that university experience. I found myself really kind of frustrated with both Nick and Charlie as characters, watching how they fail to really tackle it and communicate around their anxieties, their fears, their concerns. They have these really turbulent interactions and arguments where they just really don't know how to navigate the big emotions that they're feeling. And whilst I found that frustrating reading it as an adult reader, it felt so incredibly true to life around how teenagers do interact when they're dealing with those kind of big emotions around love that they've not experienced before. They're not equipped with the tools to kind of navigate those conversations, to navigate those arguments. And whilst I found myself like annoyed with them individually and as a couple, I totally understood why they were failing to resolve what was going on in a productive way. I do think I enjoy the Heartstopper graphic novels a lot more than I enjoyed this one, but I will read absolutely anything that Alice Oseman writes. I am really glad that I read this one, and I think I'm just a total like completionist when it comes to Heartstopper and Alice Oseman's writing more broadly. Okay, I'm quickly going to whiz through the 6 books that I read for work, starting with The Witcheries by Annalise Avery. I really enjoy everything that I read for work, but sometimes there is a book that I just like absolutely fall in love with, and The Witcheries was that for me. This is kind of Charmed meets Bridgerton. It is witches in this kind of Regency-esque setting where we are following our main character enter into her debutante season as a witch, where she is expected to tether her magic to someone else. But no one wants to tether to our main character because she is cursed. So this means that she risks losing her magic forever. Meanwhile, her and her family's arch nemesis, Jules Knightley, is also investigating if there's a way to keep your magic without tethering. So because they have this joint mission of figuring out whether that's possible, they start investigating whether that's possible together. But they have to have a reason why they're spending so much time together. So they decide to fake date. They have this kind of fomance, and we follow them spending time in libraries together, learning more about magic, the connection and the chemistry between the two of them growing. It's incredibly swoony, and this forbidden fomance turns into a genuine forbidden love. It was just so much fun and so swoony and gorgeous. We follow them sending these fake love notes to one another, but you can actually see the real meaning behind them. This just felt really, really romantic, and I absolutely loved it. I also read This Story is a Lie by Benjamin Dean. So this was the World Book Day book this year for the Independent Readers category. This is a thriller where we follow Harley Matthews, who has largely been a bit of a wallflower, happy to kind of fade into the background. But he is then chosen for the school's Rising Star program for gifted and talented students. He's thrust into the school's spotlight because of that, but then one day he finds a chalk outlining of the ground of his own body, and he realizes that someone wants him out of the competition in a very permanent way. As it's a World Book Day book, it is a really short one, but I was really impressed with how the like tension and mystery was built in such a kind of like small page count. So definitely one for fans of teen thrillers. I also read The Last Journey by Stacey Gregg, and this is largely the reason that I want to explore more animal adventure stories. In this book, we are following a cat called Pusskin, and the whole book is narrated from his perspective, which is one of my absolute favorite things about this book. I just found it so unique and such a brilliant way of storytelling. When birds begin to disappear from the sky, the cat population is blamed for this by the government, and suddenly like domestic cats are in a lot of danger. So Pusskin decides that it is up to him to lead his neighborhood of feline friends to safety, and we follow him over the course of that journey. It's incredible how packed with tension this book is, and packed with heartfelt emotion, and having those kind of feelings through the lens of this cat narrator was just so unique, and I absolutely loved it. It's a book that has lots to do with kind of the environment and social justice and standing up for what is right, but again, through this lens of being told through a cat is just so brilliant. It's a bit of a cat theme for the next few books. This is Wild Magic, The Legend of the Black Lion by Abiola Bello. So this is a really highly illustrated young fiction book, so like for kids like 6+, about twins Misha and Ziggy. One of them can shapeshift into animals, one can talk to animals, and they join their father on a trip to Ethiopia, and while they're there they discover the legend of the Black Lion, so a black lion that is missing, and they use their powers to help uncover the mystery of of what has happened. So it's got some really great kind of like soft learning messages around like going to different countries and animals and conservation, wrapped up in this really fun animal adventure. I also have Diary of a Puss in Boots by Ben Miller. So this is in the Fairy Tale Woods series, where we have illustrated diary entries from characters that we know and love from fairy tales. These are really, really funny. I think the diary entry format is really like accessible and it makes it a really quick read, but also seeing through the lens of these characters that we maybe don't always get to hear about, and kind of flipping some of the ideas that we have about these characters from fairy tales in a really funny way is just really enjoyable. And then finally, I have Happy Hill's Mr. Big Fluff Rules by Sophie Henn. This is a graphic novel series. This is the third in the series where we follow the residents of Happy Hills and all of the kind of bonkers and crazy stuff that happens to them. They're really episodic, like bite-sized stories in a way that makes it a really quick, fast-paced read. I love all of the different characters and all of the different kind of chaos and characteristics that they have. These books are genuinely so funny. Like, as an adult reader, I find myself giggling away at lots of the jokes in them, and I think if you are a film fan, you are in for a real treat with this one because there are lots of really funny references to well-known films in it. So there we have it. They are the 17 books that I read in April. Quite a mammoth reading month. I don't think I'm going to read as many books in May. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books, what you thought of them. Do you agree with me, with my opinions? Or did you hate some of the books that I really enjoyed? What emoji do I want you to leave me? There's gotta be a honey emoji, I think. So if you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me a honey emoji or like a bee emoji in honor of the Honey Witch. That's it for me today. I hope you're well and I'll speak to you in my next video.